702.
Education.
17 minutes past 10, and you've heard correctly. You are with the Aubrey Masango Show. My name is Wasanga Mehana, keeping you company, of course, for the next 2 hours or so. And we are talking about my favorite topic, educators. And we do have Sarah Koopman on the line, head of Partnerships and Advocacy at Jakes Gerwel Fellowship. If you missed the intro, as the G20 summit approaches, South Africa enters the conversation with a fragile teacher workforce. Nearly half of public school teachers are 50 or older, while burnout, attrition, violence, and overwhelming workloads continue to erode morale, contributing to our teacher shortage crisis. Jakes Gerwel Fellowship has stepped forward, urging that professional development must not only be strengthened, but made truly accessible if we are to safeguard the future of the teaching profession. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us this evening. How are you?
Hi, Wasanga. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for opening up this conversation. I'm looking forward to chatting more.
I always talk about how educators are my top 3 and not number 2. So this is such an important discussion. I come from a co-ed school, Hudson Park in East London, and it's really punched above its weight when it came to education. And I've got wonderful memories even from writing. I remember the first time my grade 7 teacher, she was the first person to actually put one of my stories in the yearbook. I was, she told me I could write. So it's those small nuggets that really shape us, and even my love for words and vocabulary and language and communication come from, being able to have that encouragement. I look at, for example, I'll never forget a news report of Vasco da Gama, which is a popular, not the most popular South African team, but they visited a school. And you could see the children lighting up. They were so excited and all these kind of things. And I can go on and on about teachers' phase and those kind of things. But nonetheless, where do we start the conversation with enabling educators and being a part of the conversation and understanding exactly what our educators are facing?
Yes, I think it's great that you started this with a story about one of the teachers who had a remarkable impact on your life. Something that we always hold dear to the work that we do is that you can have no other profession if you can't read, write, or count. And those are skills taught to every person in society at some stage in their lives by a teacher. So this is a core part of the work that we do at the Jakes Gerwel Fellowship, where we try to understand the struggle of teachers and really promote and work towards ongoing professional development. As you mentioned, the G20 summit is on its way, and the education working group has been meeting since February. And what's come through out of those discussions and what they've put forward going into the G20 summit this year is that professional development is central to the future of teaching. And that for us, at Jakes Gerwel Fellowship begs the critical question of, can all teachers actually access this development? Because ultimately, if professional learning isn't accessible and continuous and collaborative, then we can't actually claim to be building a sustainable, high quality teaching profession. So that for us is a critical question. And often, as you mentioned, teachers are more than just educators. They are more than just deliverers of a curriculum. They become guardians, they become therapists, they become social workers, and all of that extra burden, which many of them carry with grace and with enthusiasm and passion more than anything else, are the things that add to burnout and attrition that leads them to leave the profession early. So from our standpoint and what we've seen in our programs is through early intervention in the beginning stages of a teacher's career, those first 3 to 5 years once they've graduated, through supporting them in those years, it's more likely that they will stay in the profession in the long term. We are facing a potential retirement crisis in the next 10 or so years, where older teachers who've been in the profession their whole lives are now reaching retirement age, and many younger teachers are leaving the profession very early. So we are looking at how do we ensure teachers stay, and ultimately to the benefit of the learner and society as a whole.
Let's do the numbers here. Economically, does it make sense to be an educator? And it's really a honest question with regards to, we make the jokes and, being the nobility behind being a teacher, the Ford or whatever. But when you look at the standard of living, it used to be everyone could, be okay with even one job. Now these days you have to have a second, third job and supplement your salary and, those kind of things. Can we look at maybe the standard of living and how much teachers are generally paid? It's not realistic to be able to keep them. Is that a conversation we can have? How do we talk about just the reality of how educators are living?
I think it is a conversation to be had. Unfortunately, I'm not the right person to have it with. I think the conversation around sort of the cost of living and teacher salaries is critical, and it's true for all public servants and all civil society professions. Nurses come to mind, doctors come to mind as well, and that is a conversation that I think is ongoing within the teacher unions, who are well represented and are very vocal about what that actually translates to in the pocket of the teacher as that conversation goes on. And it's a struggle I think all South Africans are facing and grappling with in terms of what that cost of living is. But for us at JGF, the focus really is on about if they are in the profession, if they are there by choice or by circumstance, what can we do and what can the system do to ensure that they are supported in the work that they are doing, acknowledging the struggles that they're facing, both economically, as you've mentioned, but also socially, I think is a big part of it. We often forget what a central part of communities in a social space schools actually become. It is where the feeding scheme is run from, or it is where the local arts and culture programs are run from. It's a safe space for a lot of learners who face, tough home situations. So that schooling environment becomes more than just a place for learning. It becomes a place for safety. And often it's the teachers who are carrying that alongside the role that they play in delivering the curriculum.
Yeah, thank you for guiding my bleeding heart there for a second. Can we focus on those 1 to 3 years in terms of early intervention?
Sure.
My other favorite people, doctors and young doctors especially, but without digressing too much, what are those challenges that early intervention could assist with in those first 1 to 3 years as an educator?
Absolutely. I think, as I mentioned, these auxiliary issues, if you want to think of it in that way, are often the extra pressures that teachers are facing. Learners come to school to learn, but they also come to school with everything that they've carried from home. This could be a difficult home situation. They haven't had food. They haven't had electricity. They haven't had access to the resources that they need to complete their schoolwork, Yes. And before they're able to learn that day's lesson, the teacher must first overcome those hurdles to bring them into the classroom and to get their minds into that 45 minutes to an hour that they're with that teacher in that lesson. And what we don't realize is the burden that adds to the teacher. It's a mental toll, it's an emotional toll, and often what that results in is burnout and it is fatigue. And we have seen the mental health decline, increases in anxiety and depression, and real struggles that teachers are facing, which then impedes their ability to teach. And it becomes quite a vicious cycle where a well teacher is a well classroom.
Yes.
And that, in order for learners to thrive, we must ensure that teachers are thriving. And often, particularly at this time of the year, as we are nearing the end of matric exams and the school year is ending, and it becomes all about the learner, as it should be. And in progressing and getting through to the next grade or finishing school is critical, but we forget how that happens. And that happens through the hand of the teacher. Often there are teachers who are giving extra lessons after hours or on weekends to help learners overcome learning gaps and to make sure that they are able to succeed. And those pressures often lead to early attrition, as we call it, where I think we also forget the big jump it is from being a student learning to be a teacher. You are 19, 20, 21 years old, and then, within a few months, you find yourself in a classroom.
Crazy.
And now you are in charge of 18-year-olds, or being the sole holder of their futures in some instances. And that's a massive jump. And I think, you spoke about doctors as well. It's very similar that one day you're a student and the next minute you're in charge of someone's life. And what we forget is the importance of bridging those gaps. And those are some of the pressures that lead to this early attrition, where it becomes unworkable, completely unplayable for a lot of young teachers who choose to leave the profession entirely. Some of them may choose to teach overseas. They may choose to change careers entirely. And even if they're staying in South Africa, walk away from the education system. And I think it's a fallacy to believe that people become teachers as a fallback option, when, at least from the teachers that I've had exposure to, there's real passion there. There's a real drive to want to contribute to the future of this country and to nurturing young minds and the real power that education holds. And I think that's something we understand very clearly as a country, the power of education, and to have educators who struggle to get out of bed in the morning because of the pressures that they're facing is a real problem that we should be addressing head on.
Yeah, the NPO, the Jakes Gerwel Fellowship, comments on 3 priorities in a statement specifically on the area of professional development, which the organization believes is critical to safeguard for the profession, with key being, you mentioned accessibility. With professional learning, it cannot remain an occasional intervention. Accessibility is the real test of whether we are building a sustainable profession. So there's 3 priorities for South Africa as it advances the EDWG's work. And the first one, I just want to spend some time on it: professional learning communities in every school to normalize peer-led development. What does this look like?
So professional learning communities are established and they're quite well run around the country, and they are run in different formats. You can find a Facebook group that's very active, or a WhatsApp group, or a community of teachers that meets together. Most importantly, they are practitioner-led, or in this instance, educator-led. They are peer-based, school-based groups where teachers collaborate, they share insights, and they offer each other critique and practice, their pedagogical competencies with each other. And they may meet weekly or monthly or online or in person, and through this sort of multiply the impact of learning in a peer setting. We've seen that these are incredibly powerful mechanisms for ongoing professional development because they are teacher-to-teacher, peer-to-peer engagements. And because of the power of these groups, it's also possible for a smaller group, a subset of that PLC, to have gone to a workshop and then bring their learning back into the bigger PLC to share that and sort of multiply the effect of that learning across peers of either the same school, the same subject, phase, grade, etc. You can group educators in a number of different ways.
Yes.
And that sort of peer-to-peer passion is ignited in that way as well. So, of course, programs like ours are important, but in order to have that impact at scale, the PLCs play a really critical role. So for us, it is about how do we empower educators to ensure that they are setting up and running and maintaining strong PLCs within their teaching communities, and also encouraging younger teachers to be part of them and have that transfer of skill and transfer of knowledge. We take for granted, I think, how much you learn on the job in any profession.
True.
And the value of experience. We often hear jokes about, first-time jobs needing you to have 15 years of experience. But the truth is that experience is what counts. Experience is what you've learned in your day-to-day stretching of that muscle. And everything that teachers learn in university is valuable, but it's theory. What they bring and what they learn in a PLC as an example, or even in the staff room from their peers in the same school as them, is what that theory means in practice. And really, I think another way to think about PLCs is as the connective tissue of a healthy education system that is driven by and supported by teachers for and by one another.
I love this language, an entire connective tissue. Whew. If you've just joined us, we are stimulating one of my favorite passion points. We're talking about educators and really wonderful initiatives with Sarah Koopman from she's the head of Partnerships and Advocacy at Jakes Gerwel Fellowship. And if you'd like to chime in and join in on this wonderful discussion, I know we lament a lot about some of the challenges our educators are facing. We have incredible tools, and I'm going into the second of 3, which is a shared national framework to measure year-on-year progress in teacher development. That sounds exciting. Is it that like a dashboard of sorts?
That would be, in an ideal world, yes, a dashboard where we're able to align the results that our teachers are seeing with international benchmarks like the Teaching and Learning International Survey, which is information gathered about teachers and school learners about working conditions and their learning conditions from around the world. And I think this would give us sort of like a pulse check, of what it's like for the teachers at the moment. It would help us to track improvement along their own professional development, identify any gaps where they might exist, and build accountability and ownership as well.
Don't worry, Sarah. I'll send my invoice later.
I'm not sure if I'm the one to build it, but
yeah, man,
it's an idea nonetheless.
Yeah, we've got a lot of data. That's our biggest advantage. But a lot of this data lives in silos.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if we can get to a place of extracting the story from the data, because data is just numbers on a spreadsheet, 100%. Right? But when you can pull the story out of it, it's so rich in telling you of what's actually happening. Yeah. There are reasons behind low literacy rates or low numeracy rates. There are reasons behind learning delays, or any gaps that we might see there. What we need to learn to do and establish strong systems to do is to unpack those stories and find the root causes of where those gaps exist in the data, if there are any. And I think also then to build accountability and ownership with and for the teachers in the data that we're extracting. It's very easy to sit from a distance and point fingers and say, oh, teachers are lazy, teachers are corrupt, teachers are all of these things. But there's a story behind every one of those accusations. And if we can then start to identify where those root causes are and take ownership as a community, and I think this is something that we look at as well, is that support for teachers must be a community effort. It must come from parents. It must come from guardians. It must come from other areas of the community, because a learner, a child, is not the sole responsibility of the teacher whose class they find themselves in. They come to the teacher, as a ward for those few hours that the teacher has them. And it can't be on the teacher's shoulders alone to carry them through, in the same way that it can't be the teacher can't stand alone in doing that. So I think in being able to build these sorts of shared frameworks to track teacher growth, track their progression, is a way to understand and build a common understanding of what professional development and improvement could look like, and develop different ways to track it, so that, on all ends of the spectrum, we can have a better sense of what teachers need and how we can feed into that to support them.
And we talked about experience, and we call it spillion in some corners, but that experience, and as much as you want to, you may teach as much as you want, but at the bare facts and bare points, a friend of mine who I love telling this story, Zoe, she told me about how she would be in a classroom of 40 plus students in a rural or township school. And she'd say to me, Wasanga, obviously these are kids, they're making a noise, and all I'm trying to do is just find and connect with those eyes that are still trying to listen to me, and I can get through them. So it becomes so difficult, and eventually the journey for her she's an excellent teacher. So obviously the private schools came knocking, and she's at quite an elite school right now. How much of that would you say is happening with our educators?
I'd say a fair amount, but I think at the same time, we have teachers in our own programs who have deliberately chosen to work in under-resourced schools, who have had opportunities to leave the profession, in fact, to be engineers or to be, other professions, and who have chosen with a lot of intention to go eyes wide open into these environments, understanding the value of having a strong teacher with passion in a space like that. You spoke about a teacher who set you on a path, to realize you could write. And sometimes it is just one learner in a class that is going to, be taken by the lesson and do something with it beyond that. And I think there are a lot of teachers who, for reasons that are true to them and personal to them, that make the shift, that, as you referenced now, from a more under-resourced school to, a private school or a better resource school. But I think more often than not, the stories that we don't hear are of the teachers who choose to be in these difficult situations. True. And they are very aware of how difficult it is. And that, I think, it's not honorable and it's not noble. And I don't want to glorify that resilience, because I think that then makes an excuse for the system to not improve. I think more than anything else, we need to find those teachers and provide them with the support that we can, so that they can, feel strong and capable in terms of showing up every day, while also working to ensure that those systems are improved, because it's not just for the teacher. To be a learner in a class of 40, 50 learners is not conducive to learning either. So that, I think, it's a South Africanism, actually, to applaud resilience when actually we should be, holding fast to the solution and finding different and better solutions in the long run. And I think one of the other areas that we are looking into is how do we then try to ensure that accessibility for those teachers in those under-resourced schools, because they often tend to be left out of ongoing development as well. The school can't always afford for them to be off for a day or two to go to a workshop, or they don't have the means to get to wherever that destination is. And what ultimately then happens is that this deepens inequality in the classroom, and it really deepens inequality between schools.
Sorry, you never think about, who educates the educators, their struggles, their battles. And I remember, there's this anecdote about an educator who, you get those really smart students, and then she says, "I'll get back to you." Because she genuinely is stumped.
Exactly that. Exactly that.
Yeah, I mean, who educates the educator? My passion for maths was absolutely obliterated by an educator who said, the answers are in the back of a textbook.
Yeah. Look, I think it's exactly those examples that you're referring to now are so real and so true to a lot of us. You can think back to a teacher who either who flipped a switch for you one way or another on a particular subject just by how they showed up in the space. And for us, that is true. That is what ongoing professional development is. And you speak about who educates the educator. Of course, it's their university professors and lecturers who help them get their teaching qualification. But beyond that, bodies like SACE, the South African Council for Educators, are driving ongoing professional teaching standards. And, teachers are encouraged to acquire their professional development points and go to workshops and learn new techniques for how to be in, how to deliver a lesson, or how to take their pedagogical competencies and translate that into meaningful learning for their learners. So that level of ongoing development has a real impact in the classroom. It's necessary for a teacher to be upskilled on 21st century skills so that they can ensure their learners are equipped with those skills as well. So when we have that level of accessibility and ongoing development for all teachers, especially those in rural or under-resourced schools, we are able to overcome that level of inequality that exists between classrooms and exists between learners. And by pulling that lever of accessibility, we ensure teachers are more confident. They have, more likely to stay around in the classroom, or less likely to tell you that the answer's in the back of the textbook. And they really, what starts to develop is a greater sense of professional identity. And I think that's a key piece for us as well at Jakes Gerwel Fellowship, is a sense of professionalizing the profession again, where we regard teachers with the same esteem as we do other professions. And there's a lot that happens behind the scenes in preparing a lesson and setting an exam and marking an exam. And all of that is ongoing development. You can't rely on what you learned at university, 10, 15 years ago. There's new research that comes out. There's new methodologies that are developed. And that's through ongoing professional development and workshops. I think one thing that a lot of us feel jealous about when it comes to teachers is that they have school holidays off, and it just feels like they can constantly be on holiday. But the truth is, a lot of teachers are using their holidays to attend workshops. And, the time that we assume them to be off is when they're preparing for the next term, or they are learning a new skill, or setting different exams or even taking exams themselves. So accessible professional learning keeps great teachers in classrooms because they feel supported and valued.
Just wrapping up our conversation, last 17 minutes or so, if you'd like to chime in, if you're an educator, if your interest has been piqued, you're more than welcome to tune or chime in. 011-883-0702. We'd love to hear your thoughts if you'd like to finish off, or even talk about who your favorite educator was, their turning point in your career or life that really, or you've noticed a gap or an opportunity, or if you've found a professional network for educators that has worked. Please do call in 011-883-0702, SMSs on 31702, WhatsApps and voice notes on 072-702-1702. Then leading into the last conversation, smarter use of low-cost digital tools to relieve workloads and expand participation. So I think that the argument or conversation around AI and tools is always fundamentals first before automation.
Yes.
But I'd love to hear your view on this last conversation.
Look, I think it's always an interesting conversation in South Africa. Like you said, fundamentals first, but there are other issues as well, like rural schools that simply don't have access to data, Wi-Fi, even electricity in some instances. But what we are talking about in terms of these digital tools or technologies actually is low cost, low bandwidth tools that work on, basic devices. So these could be tools that cut admin time and help teachers plan faster, or allow asynchronous collaboration in a classroom. So we are also aware, though, that technology isn't the solution on its own. Technology is an enabler which extends human connection so that even, isolated teachers might have the ability to participate in a PLC, for example. So, tech shouldn't replace teachers, but it should release teachers to do what they do best, which is to teach. And these sort of non-expensive, simple, accessible tools are actually vital for rural, remote, and time-constrained teachers.
Yes.
They are... it's harder for them to, get access to their peers sometimes because their school is a 3-hour drive away from a city center. And if they're able to connect via even a WhatsApp group call, sometimes that might be a different way for them to accessibly connect with their peers and share information. And we forget how low cost and accessible tools like WhatsApp groups were ways in which teachers were able to ensure ongoing learning through the pandemic. And in the heart of lockdown, sharing worksheets with their learners via WhatsApp it's not ideal, but it is a workaround to overcome some of the challenges that they may face in the classroom. So I think really it is about ensuring that we are able to extend human connection, leveraging technology before we even get to things like AI. How can we, put those fundamentals in place and extend that human connection and not replace it, and ensure that teachers are able to use these simple and accessible tools to ease the load that they experience and get on with the business of the day, which is ultimately teaching.
And I think that one of my favorite economists, Jeremy Rifkin, talks about, the third industrial revolution with regards to rural, especially communities, because the theory is that a lot of modern, which is the current status quo, it's burdened by archaic infrastructure. So in effect, some of the rural communities could skip a step because they don't have that archaic rural technology. As you've mentioned, even something as simple as mobile phones and WhatsApp can really get conversations going about how to develop educators and share information.
Yeah, absolutely that. And I think sometimes we're trying to strive to the next biggest, brighter, best thing and then forget the assets that we actually have at our disposal, in the moment. And sometimes that challenge is difficult to take on when you're just trying to get through the day to day. And, when the day to day is heavy or overwhelming, that is even more difficult to do. But to sit for a moment and sometimes just ask, what do we have? And one of our program participants who was in their second year of teaching was asked, how do they cope in an under-resourced school? And they simply said, well, I am the resource in the school. And it was such a profound thing to hear such a young person say.
Amazing.
That they identified themselves as valuable in that space with their knowledge, with their learning, with their access and capability. They said, well, I am the resource. I bring what I have to the space. And that is a level of ingenuity and I think innovation and thinking that you are not constrained by simply what is around you, what you have at your disposal, and to see yourself as valuable to that space based on what you know and what you can do. And I think that's incredibly powerful. And it's the kind of thing that you could share in a professional learning community as an example to say, hey guys, what do you have already? How do we leverage what we already have? Again, that's not the solution completely. Again, I'm not going to applaud resilience through strife, but what I am going to say is that there is a level of entrepreneurial thinking in that I think is quite innate to South Africans and is something that we can leverage to further the gains that we're really trying to make.
Where would you place our teaching gaps versus the global challenges?
They are substantial. We score really, really low in terms of numeracy and literacy rates around the world. And again, there are various and many reasons as to where that comes from and why that is. And I think at the moment, we're also trying to overcome learning losses that we experienced through COVID. So that may seem like a long time ago for some people, but we're still catching up some of those losses that have happened. And this is where organizations like ourselves and many other partners in the space are trying to overcome those gaps in, tackling the problem in different areas. In some cases, it's about actual resources and content to learners. In other instances, it's about teaching support in the classroom and ensuring teachers have what they need when they're delivering a lesson. And in our instance, it's about ensuring that where there are gaps for the individual teacher, that they feel empowered and have the access to the professional development that they need to overcome those gaps. And often for us, those collaborative spaces are really the linchpin to it all, because in collaboration, you're able to find partners that are experts in their various spaces. And it's important that these expertise are leveraged as and when and where they are needed, because the problems in, I think, all civil society are many, but in education, there's a buffet of them. You know, you speak of learning losses, you speak of gaps in our rankings compared to our international peers. You can speak about nutrition problems. You can speak about textbook problems. Like the problems are many. And I don't think we're ever shying away from there being many problems. But what we're very clear about is that when the problems are many, you need targeted solutions.
Yes.
And for us at JGF, that targeted solution, our key point of intervention is the teacher. It is a novice teacher in the early years of their career. It is the professional development of a novice teacher. And we've had to get that granular so that we can ensure, we are finding a particular point of impact for our work to ensure that learners ultimately are the beneficiaries of this in the long run. But in terms of the day-to-day, it's the teacher, and it's ensuring that they stay where they are and that they feel seen and supported in doing the work that they do.
One thing that we're all guilty of is not paying enough attention. And I really feel that this is an important conversation, and organizations like the JGF are quite important. Can you just give us contact details? Where can we get a hold of the JGF? What can we look forward to outside of the G20 for our listeners? How can we support your initiatives? Because we don't want it to, as you mentioned, to be just a one-sided conversation. We need all of society, private, everyone listening in. I mean, we need educators who are feeling disheartened, who may be feeling inspired, who want to share tidbits of knowledge. Can you just share those details with us, and who can get in touch, and what progress are we making, and how can we get involved?
Thanks so much, Wasanga. This has been a really great conversation. And I think ultimately, if we want strong learners in South Africa, we must build strong support around teachers. And ultimately, everything else flows from that. And we often speak about these teacher shortages or the struggles, in terms of output. But what we're really facing is a well-being and sustainability crisis. When teachers are overwhelmed or isolated or feel unsupported, the quality of their teaching is what suffers. And, ultimately, like I said before, people leave. So when they feel connected and valued and like they're professionally growing, they stay, and learners ultimately benefit. And that is the work that we at the Jakes Gerwel Fellowship are honed in on. We emphasize, collaboration is important. As I said, we have ongoing conversations with the Department of Basic Education, and the department is working on this. I think that that's an important thing to say. Amazing. This is not a by the wayside piece of, of work or low importance for the department, and none of this is new. Professional development has always been there. It's always been an important key and necessary topic. But what JGF does is thrive in converting the policy and thinking and academic theory about professional development, and we put it into action. So we look specifically at induction and how we support teachers through it. And in terms of finding out more about what we do, I think our LinkedIn is the best place to find us. We are Jakes Gerwel Fellowship on LinkedIn. We've got latest updates, and, most importantly, I think what's really special for me is voices of our teachers who have been on our program and some of the work that they're doing and the impact that they are having as well, which is incredibly powerful. But we are always looking at opportunities for collaboration. And as I said before, leveraging other expertise within the space. So, reach out to us on LinkedIn, or I'm available on LinkedIn as well as Sarah Koopman. And we're always open to having conversations like this, because you said, we're all a bit guilty of not paying attention. But I think the truth is that there's a lot to pay attention to, even just as a South African. If you, cast your eyes over the news in 24 hours, there's a lot going on, and it's a lot to feel overwhelmed by. But if there is, I think, something that stands out to any of your listeners or any, teachers who want to share their knowledge and connect with other teachers in a professional learning space, we would love to have that conversation with them and be open to that. So I think the more we have these kinds of conversations, I never want people to feel guilty for not knowing. I think that's
I was just talking
that's
about
a weird paralysis that we found ourselves
yeah,
in.
just talking about I've embraced embarrassment, for example. We're too caught up
absolutely,
in
absolutely.
So
there's a lot to know in the world, and there's a lot to learn. And I think just realizing that there are other angles. Most of us only ever experience school as learners. A smaller portion of us experience school as learners and then as teachers. And what we then forget is that there's another perspective to this. And this, I think, has been the value of JGS work for me as a non-educator, has been seeing that there's another side to the coin. There is the matriculant writing their exam, but then there's someone who has to mark it, and there's someone who set that exam, and there's someone who carries that learning through, all the way to the final days. And that, I think, is just created a different level of awareness for me and in the work that I do for others. And that, I think, is the kinds of conversations we need to have, where we're just sort of saying, oh, I didn't know that was what you're experiencing. I'd like to learn more. I'd like to know more. I'd like to offer more. And that is the sort of inclusive conversation that we're always trying to open up. It's not about pointing fingers. It's not about saying who is and who isn't doing what they should or shouldn't be doing. Ultimately, it's about saying, what is the need? And for us, we know that the need is ongoing professional development. And how do we address it? And finding ways, collaborative partnerships, and different kinds of community-oriented ways to center the teacher again and help them to feel seen and supported in the long run.
Thank you so much. That's our education feature with SA Teachers Crisis Worsening Without Accessible Teacher Training, and Sarah Koopman, Head of Partnerships and Advocacy.